Hello beautiful plant people, welcome back to Rooting Mindfully. Today I am going to show you guys my fern collection and give you some tips so that way you can grow your fern collection just as big and beautiful. Stay tuned. So today I'm going to show you my fern collection, and believe it or not, ferns have become my most varied plant in my collection. I would have never thought that I would have so many ferns. I actually thought that monsteras would have been my favorite plants, but as it turns out, I love ferns. And my first couple of ferns I'm going to show you the more beginner friendly ones, and then we're going to move into the more intermediate, more advanced ferns. Alright, so the first fern I have is the crispy wave fern. And this fern is just absolutely gorgeous. I love the texture of this fern. It is amazing. The ripples are just so cool. And this fern I got from the terrain. I actually already had a crispy wave fern, but when I saw this one, I honestly just got it for this leaf here because it was curling up. I don't know why, but sometimes when there's a slight variation of a plant, I will go ahead and get it. But this is the first crispy wave fern that I had, and I got this one off of Etsy. Now this one is slightly different than this one, and I'll show them side by side. This one, the fronds are more narrow and they're not as broad, while this one does have more wider fronds. So there's just a slight difference in these two ferns, but I love them both. And these are definitely beginner friendly ferns in my opinion. My next fern is the Champion's Bird's Nest Fern. This one is slightly different than the regular bird's nest fern. The fronds do shoot more upwards, and as well as they have like the ruffling or the feather-like appearance on the tips of the leaves. I love how compact this fern is, and I would say this one is definitely more beginner friendly. So if you notice, the more broadleaf ferns are more beginner friendly in my opinion, but this is just a beautiful fern, and it just really doesn't give me any hard times. The next fern is what you would call a more traditional bird's nest fern, and as you can see, this one is different from the Champion's fern. It does grow more outwards, as well as there's more rippling on the leaves than that feather-like appearance. But this is a beautiful fern, and that's what it looks like there. I love it when you see new fronds coming out of the center of the fern, and how each frond that comes in more shiny than the one before. And no, I don't shine the fronds, they just naturally come out shiny like this. Now moving to a variety of fern that has really stolen my heart are the Staghorn Ferns. And I do say that these are more beginner friendly because they're just so much easier to take care of. They don't require a ton of light. These do like more light than the bird's nest fern or the crispy wave fern, but they're not as difficult as the more thinner leaf varieties. But that's what that fern looks like. I even have a new shield growing here on this fern. The only thing to note is that with the Staghorn ferns, the shields will come in really green, and then over time they will turn brown and crispy, like with this one here. As you can see, that shield is brown. You don't want to pick those shields off just because the plant still needs those shields to protect, the base of the plant and the roots. So you just want to make sure that you don't pick off the older shields, because you'll do more harm than good to the plant. But the Staghorn Fern is just the most amazing beginner friendly fern to have. I actually like them so much that I went and bought 2 more. The next couple of ferns I have are more intermediate, just because they're not as they don't give you as much grace with missing waterings and having a lower humidity. I would say the broader leaf ones can get away with lower humidity than these finer ferns. And this one is a Ming Fern. This one, like I said, doesn't give you as much grace if you miss the watering. As you can see, there's some browning in there. I know this isn't a humidity issue because my humidity is a lot higher. If you checked out my Instagram stories the other day, my humidity was actually at 82%, and that was after 3 or 4 days of having, just constant rain. But my humidity is really high, so that's why these ferns do really well in my environment. And I think this one is actually blooming. I've never seen a fern bloom, but with any other plants that bloom, when a plant blooms, it's really happy. So even though I missed a couple waterings, this plant is still doing really well. And if you see these light green chartreuse colors, that is just the new growth that's coming in on this plant. The next one I have, this one was labeled as an Asparagus Fern, but I actually believe that this is a Foxtail Fern. And then you can see again the chartreuse, those are the new fronds that come in, and then when they do come in, they're a little bit more sparse, and then they move to this darker green, more dense color here. But I love this plant, and I don't know if it's because it reminds me of a little bush or a tree that you would see outside, but it is just really cute. This one again isn't as forgiving. If you miss a watering, you will get a little bit of browning, but it's still pretty, easy to take care of. It's just not as easy as the other ones that I showed prior. My next fern is the Asparagus Fern, which, believe it or not, is actually not a fern. And it's just interesting to see that what different ferns look like. But ferns are actually a part of so many families that it's kind of hard to, mention them all. But this is what my Asparagus Fern looks like. As you can see, it has a lot of fronds here. And when the cool thing is that when they come out, they shoot out these long stems like Hoyas. Got stuck in my hair, like Hoyas, and then they'll start to fill them in, and they'll look more sparse in the beginning, and then after a while they'll get condensed like this section here. But I love watching the stage of this plant. This plant especially is not forgiving if you miss a watering. If you can see some of that browning in there, it does not like that at all. But it will bounce back if you just go ahead and water it. And you could just prune off, some of that browning. The other thing to note is that this plant, as it matures, it does develop these thorns on the plant, if you can see that. So you do have to be careful when you're repotting and handling this plant. I didn't know before I got this plant that it actually developed those thorns, but if you just want to make a note of that, that's something you do want to watch out for. But this is a gorgeous fern. This is actually one of the ferns that prefers to be in a smaller pot. So when I did my houseplant tour, it wasn't a bigger pot. But I read that if you want to keep it more compact and happy, it does prefer to be in a smaller pot. So that's why I bumped it down into this pot. And the next fern that I showed prior is the Australian tree fern. Now this one has got to be one of my favorite ferns, and I will show you why. If you look in there, there's a lot of fur. A lot of the the fronds are very furry, and if you guys watch my channel, I love furry plants. And then the coolest thing here is that the new growth that develops here are actually called fiddleheads. So this plant in the center is full of fiddleheads. If you can see that, they come out of the center of the plant, and it just gives it such an intriguing look when the fiddleheads develop. And a cool thing about this plant is that this furry trunk here, if you were to propagate it, say if this plant was 6 feet tall and you wanted to chop it down because it got too tall, you would actually chop off the trunk and put that in another pot of soil, so that way you could start over. Now, of course, the bottom of the plant would die off, but where you chop it is where another plant would start, because in this trunk is actually full of roots. So if you chop it, the roots will come down from the middle of this trunk and start a whole new plant. So I was pretty intrigued by that, to see that this one is more different than the other ferns that I have here, because normally you wouldn't think that the trunk of a plant holds the roots. So I thought that was really cool. But that is what the top of the plant looks like. And this one did come a little overwatered, so I'm going to cut off the older fronds as the new ones come in. But this is just a really cool plant, and normally people grow them outside and they can get as tall as your house. Like, they get really big. The next ones I have are maidenhair ferns, and I just got these the same time as I got the other ferns from the terrain, and I'm kind of using these as an experiment just to see if I can take care of maidenhair ferns, because they are known to be more difficult than the other ferns, just because they do need more humidity than the rest. But these ones are doing pretty well. I do have to water them 2 or 3 times a week just because they are in tinier pots. But so far, we are doing pretty good, and I will make sure to give you guys an update. So just some background on ferns. We're going to talk about the care now. With the background, the ferns belong to a wide variety of genuses and families. So if you wanted to see what specific family your fern was in, you could just Google it and it would pop up. Another thing is, some ferns are more beginner friendly than others. So if you wanted to start with like a beginner version, I would do like the bird's nest fern, or like a staghorn fern or the crispy wave, and then migrate to the other ferns, just so you can start off easier and work your way up. As far as lighting, the ferns can handle more lower light. So if you have like a north window, your ferns should be well there. If you have east facing windows, your ferns will definitely like the east facing. If you have a west window or a south window, you'll want to pull them back just so they don't get any direct light, because they don't like the direct light at all. So you want to keep them in more of a lower light or a shadier area, but not in the same conditions that you would have like a ZZ or a snake plant. You want to give them some light, you just don't have to give them a ton of light. Especially if you have a north facing window, they will do really well if that window isn't obstructed by anything. So if you don't have any buildings or trees blocking the light, they should do well there. As far as watering, ferns do need to be watered well. So with my ferns, I use my moisture meter as always, but I will wait till my ferns get to a 2, because they don't like to dry out completely. When you let them dry out completely is when you'll get the crisping and the browning tips. So what I do is I wait till it gets to a 2, not letting it dry out completely, and then I will water it thoroughly till the water drains out of the pot, and then I'll wait and let that cycle do it all over again. And usually with that, I'm watering them once or twice a week depending on the time of year. As far as temperature and humidity, ferns really like to be in temperatures between 65 and 75 degrees. So if your household is below 65 degrees, you would want to make sure that you're watering your fern less, because they're not going to use as much water. So if you stick your moisture meter in the soil, or you stick your finger in the soil, maybe wait till it's a 0, or if you stick your finger in there that you don't have any particles on your finger, that's when you know the soil is bone dry. If you have temperatures above 75, and this is what happened to me this summer, my temperatures were hitting 78. You want to water your fern more because it's using more water. So those are just some things to note. As far as humidity, now the strange thing is that some ferns can be in lower humidity. I would say the beginner, more broadleaf ferns, they can deal with humidity of 30 to 50%. But however, ferns are used to being in 70% humidity in their natural environment. So if you can provide 70% for humidity in your household, your ferns will do really well. And you can do this by doing humidity trays or pebble trays. You can get a humidifier. You know, you could spritz the fern, although that won't really bump it up that much, but those are some things that you could do to bump up the humidity. And ferns like the maidenhair fern are a type of fern that really need that 70% if you can afford it. So that's as far as humidity. As far as fertilizing, I do fertilize my plants weaker solution every time I water. Now, ferns really aren't huge feeders, so you don't have to go overboard with the fertilizer. Do a regular dose, maybe once a week or every other week, and then they should be fine. But you don't want to use a whole bunch of fertilizer and burn the roots. Less is more. As far as propagation, most ferns are propagated through division, so you could divide the plant in the pot. Some are propagated through spores. I haven't done that yet. And like I said with the Australian tree fern, you would just chop it off where you want the height to be, and then that plant the roots would draw down and start a new plant. So there's different ways of propagating ferns. As far as pests, the only pests that I've really seen with ferns are slugs. And you know, the slugs do like to get in there and start munching on the fronds. But other than that, I haven't seen too many pests for the ferns. That's pretty much it for ferns. So I showed you all my ferns that I have in my collection. I give you some tips and how to care for them. Just mainly work on the humidity and your ferns should be okay. That's pretty much it. So if you guys have any questions about ferns, or if you have ferns, leave them in the comment section below and let me know. I just want to say thank you for subscribing and liking my videos. Please like and subscribe my videos and hit the notification bell so that way you know every time I upload. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.